So again, I'm Patrick Tucker. I'm the Science and Technology Editor at Defense One. And joining me on stage, Chris Brose, former Senate Armed Services Staff Director, author of Kill Chain, and now Chief Strategy Officer at Anduril. Now, who here knows what Anduril is? Raise your hand if you know what Anduril is. He's like, you better get your hands up or we're going to drone you. But yes, this is one of the most important and innovative new technology companies that is reshaping so much of what we think about in terms of defense. It started off as an insurgent company selling software, and now you're opening a $1 billion manufacturing complex in Ohio.
Yep.
They're on the ground in Ukraine. They've been on the ground in Ukraine with the Ukrainians pretty much since 2022, from the first days of the war. They're also co-developing things with Australia, moving out on developing sub-drones at a fraction of the time that it takes the Defense Department to do it. And in so many ways, being the model for what the Defense Department is sort of trying to move towards. And one of the things that I love about Chris is that he is one of these guys that even though he works with the Defense Department and they write a lot of checks, he's very willing to talk about what he sees as the problem. And people actually really like that. People really enjoy.
Do they?
I do.
I haven't gotten as many Christmas cards recently.
Yeah. Well, when journalists like you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's like good for your career. But having said that, I do appreciate like the take that you have on things and speaking sort of directly to where the Defense Department is getting in its own way and what the opportunity space looks like right now. So with that in mind, talking a little bit about how to meet this moment of accelerating change, leverage capabilities that are going to reshape deterrence, frighten China and Russia away from bad decisions. You have said the last decade was a colossal missed opportunity for the U.S. military. So expound on that, and looking ahead, what are you afraid what are you afraid of right now in terms of an opportunity in front of them that they might miss?
Yeah. It sounds like something I would say. I don't remember when I said it, so I don't know when the sort of clock on the decade starts ticking, but yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that, we run the risk of sort of missing the opportunity in front of us, which is frankly the same opportunity we missed a decade ago. Because I think a lot of the problem that we're facing is not the need to invent, photon torpedoes and cloaking devices. It's actually the opportunity to integrate a lot of things that we have in terms of available technology, resources, phenomenal people, and really change the character of the U.S. military and allied and sort of partnered military capability. So what I mean by that in specific is to really make a move that begins to create sort of a complementary set of military capabilities that are very different from the ones that we have. For a generation, we've relied on relatively small numbers of very exquisite, very expensive platforms, vehicles, and weapons that are very difficult to build, very costly, challenging to scale, things that we're, kind of seeing in high relief in the war in Ukraine and other types of challenges. I think the opportunity that we have in front of us, and hopefully will not miss, is the opportunity to really start increasing by an order of magnitude a military arsenal that's made up of larger and larger numbers of lower cost, more intelligent, more autonomous, more mass producible systems. And I think the good news is, from where we sit here today as compared to 5 years ago when I wrote the Kill Chain, or 10 years ago when I was still in the Senate, I think the debate has really changed. I think we're arguing a lot less over what we need to be doing and more about how we go about doing it, which I think is helpful. But it still means that we have a lot of work to be done in terms of standing up new programs, changing the requirements for military power, creating entry points for all of these new companies, obviously not just Anduril, but an enormous number of companies that didn't even exist 10 years ago, that are now moving in, with excitement, with, capability, backed by billions of dollars of private capital to really try to deliver the very thing that more and more members of our defense establishment and our uniformed military say that they want.
Yeah.
So, it's a long way of saying, things are moving. I'm incredibly excited about how much they're moving, but we have still an enormous way to go. And that risk of missing the opportunity in front of us and missing the next decade is still real.
Yeah. Well, so in terms of like that opportunity, I've watched over the last 10 years as the Defense Department has basically said, we have to stop buying tanks and boats and buying software the way we buy the tanks and the boats and the ships. We must move much faster. And they created like a series of workarounds, right? Like the Defense Innovation Unit is kind of a workaround to the normal requirement process, like going through Special Operations Command, sort of a workaround to a program of record that costs like 10 years. And Congress said we have to do better, and the four-star sitting in the witness chair said, yes, we absolutely have to do better, and yet it sort of persisted for a very long time. So when you say that the conversation has changed, and yes, right now you guys are moving out with a lot of new contracts, and we're seeing programs like Replicator begin to speak to that thing that you're describing. Replicator is still a tiny program in terms of size, even though everyone agreed that it's a huge program in terms of importance. So give me one more thing that makes me feel optimistic that the conversation's actually changing.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think, when we run into these, kind of desires to do different things, we tend to think we need to go completely outside the system, create a new entirely new organization, color outside the lines, et cetera. I actually think there's an enormous amount that can be done if you adopt the flexibility in acquisition and requirements processes and budgeting that does exist, to sort of do new things inside of the system. So, I'll give you an example of how I believe this is possible. And obviously, this is a biased example because Anduril competed on and won, the Air Force's Collaborative Combat Aircraft program. Right. So this was a program that didn't exist 3 years ago.
Yeah.
There was no requirement for it. The technology was, something that research organizations and industry had been screwing around with for 20 years now.
Yeah.
So what changed? What changed was a secretary in the Air Force and a team around him that said, we are going to stop screwing around. We are actually going to create a real program. We are going to build a requirement for this capability in flight. We are going to create a competitive acquisition strategy that is going to allow multiple vendors, traditional and non-traditional, to compete on a level playing field to see what kinds of ideas they have, what kind of game they can have. And we're going to move through a phased process of down select where, the pace per mile is going to get faster and the obstacles are going to get, more challenging. At the end result, they had the conviction that they had a requirement or a starting point that made sense. They had a multi-billion-dollar position in the future year defense plan to the tune of $5 to $6 billion for the program. And they had selected 2 companies to get moving with the goal of having capability on the ramp this decade.
Yeah.
And by the way, they've won congressional approval on a bipartisan basis for everything that they're doing. So what I would submit is, there were no acquisition laws that were broken. There was no coloring outside the lines necessarily, or sort of needing to create an entirely new organization to do this. What was required was, people who had a desire and a capacity to do new and different things, to use authorities that they had, to use money that they had, to create a strategy to get a different outcome.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's still work and delivery that has to go, but for our part, Anduril will be flight testing our aircraft in like a matter of months.
Yeah.
So from being on contract or put on contract last year to first flight this summer, I would say this is a different kind of program, and it is built to scale to the hundreds and thousands of vehicles that the Air Force has said that they wanted.
Yeah.
So, when I say $5 to $6 billion, like that's an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
Until you look at it in the scope of the Air Force's budget over the same 5-year period, which, don't quote me, is somewhere around $930 billion. So the amount of money that we're talking about to make a game-changing move in terms of capability, to get it out of the sort of, research cul-de-sac and into production, into the hands of warfighters, is literally budget dust, right? So the challenge that I would sort of put to the system is how do we do exactly that kind of thing on 25 different areas of capability across the joint force?
Yeah.
Autonomous systems, low-cost weapons, other things that share those attributes. It is eminently doable. We have the money to do it. What we really need is the vision and the will to drive those new things into existence.
Yeah. So, but to your point, like a kind of counterexample that shows that there is still that barrier to like keep going. You have a joint program with Australia, and you guys with Australia, you moved out on the development prototyping of a sub drone.
Yes.
At a fraction of the time that it would have taken the United States Defense Department or the Department of the Navy to produce a program to create a sub drone.
Yes.
So what did else like? How did we get scooped by Australia? Because I mean, this is the Defense Department. We're supposed to be able to analyze our own shortcomings and move out faster. How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happened because the Australians had a desire, and they used the authorities that they had. So, like, you know, with all respect to our Australian partners, right? They're no smarter than you know, their counterparts in the United States. They certainly don't have as much money, and they are dealing with a lot of the same acquisition and procurement and contracting and requirements challenges that the U.S. has. So why did this work? This worked because, again, you had leadership recognizing the opportunity to really move the needle on a game-changing capability, and that there was an ability to do that in a very short period of time, and that from the beginning it was focused on being not a science project or a research effort, but an actual production capability. So they had the seriousness that oftentimes I see us lacking in the United States. They had to do hard things, right? They had to realign money. They had to, kind of create an acquisition pathway. They had to work requirements processes, all things that bedevil us. But my point in saying this is, these are imminently solvable problems, right? We're not trying to create, like a new branch of physics. We're actually trying to remove bureaucratic impediments or actually work through bureaucratic processes that can do different things if leadership directs them to do different things. So the reason we're not doing it in the United States was that there was literally no path to do that, right? The door was closed on an area of capability that should be something where you can consistently refresh the capability, provide new on-ramps for industry, off-ramps for industry that's not performing. But too often in the Department of Defense and the United States enterprise, right, we treat programs of record like tenure at a university, right? And once you get it, it's yours forever. And it essentially closes any opportunities to disrupt ourselves when new ideas, new threats, new technology comes along. And we don't create the incentives for it. So as a result, we get the very thing that we have created the incentives for, which is often, stagnation, tech obsolescence, programs that are underperforming, folks that are unaccountable. And that's a lot of the challenges that we've been dealing with for a generation.
So you guys, though, you are interesting because you're now a great big defense company, but you are not what anyone would call a prime. You're not like the traditional sort of defense company.
No.
How much of that program of record fetishization is kind of an extension of the way they operate? Like, hey, we're the ones that would make this jet, and programs of record work for us. And so as they begin to influence the buying entity, like you get stuck with a system that unintentionally is built to speak to those people that make those things. How much is prime contractor influence kind of at fault here?
I think there's probably plenty of that. I think there's a large degree to which the government has done this to itself, right? And I mean that in the broadest sense, congressional and executive branch. I think we speak in shorthand, right? So fetishization of programs of record. I think I would reframe it a little differently to say, if you have the aspiration to grow into a larger company, and we are a far cry from what passes for kind of prime size in the United States defense market. The only way you're going to do that is through larger programs, larger dollar programs, programs that have delivery as a function of time rather than kind of one-off things that go into demos or exercises that don't really scale. I think there's an enormous opportunity to rethink what these programs look like. There are going to be certain kinds of programs for aircraft carriers and long-range strike bombers and other things that we're just going to be dealing with an industrial base and a market that will never be able to support real competition, as I think all of us are familiar with it in the commercial world. The things that I think Anduril is focused on, robotic systems, autonomous vehicles, low-cost weapons, I think there's an opportunity to rethink entirely the the way the government goes about buying those systems is a function of time, right? All of these things are things that I would submit we're going to need in perpetuity.
Yeah.
But all of those things are going to change radically, very quickly, right? Because the technology is evolving quickly, because our thinking about requirements is evolving, because the threat is evolving.
Yeah.
And if we try to do this in the traditional way and say we have a capital R requirement and we think we can predict the future, it's all going to end in tears.
Yeah.
You have to do that for certain things. You have to do that for GBSD,
yeah.
Because it's not going to be wildly different than the ICBM that it's replacing.
Yeah.
For these kinds of systems, I think you can begin to create programs that look more like markets, where the government is actually going out to industry more regularly, every 2 to 3 years, for example, and saying, we're just going to go buy new all over again.
For these lower cost mass systems, yeah.
Right. We should be thinking about these types of systems as, effectively the defense version of like consumable items.
Yeah.
We're going to use them for a while, right? Some of these things will be purely expendable. I'm going to shoot them like ammo and I'm not going to get them back. But many of them are going to be, vehicles or other things that we're going to operate for, several years, and then we're going to go get new versions, right? Like many of us, I think, kind of buy and use or lease, commercial cars and trucks.
Yeah.
And by creating that type of demand signal and that type of signal to industry, as the monopsonistic buyer of defense that the U.S. government or any national government is, you can begin to create incentives that make it a little bit more market-like. Right? That incentivize companies to put real IRAD into the development of technology because they see an opportunity to get a return on that investment, to take more risk, right? If they lost this time around, they realize that in a year or 2 or 3, there's an opportunity to, reset things, bring their A game, and come back and have another shot at the title rather than, I lost forever. I might as well, just take my ball and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's not going to be possible in large parts of the defense market. But in the segment of the defense market that we are actively playing in and trying to help create, I think that you can create a process that's almost completely opposite from the PPBE process that we use in almost a kind of communistic central planning way to get military capability. So, but my sort of short version of the long story here is like the problem with how we think about defense in this country is that it looks too much like China at its worst and not enough like America at its best. And we need to put America at its best into places in the defense industry where it can be that way, where you can create markets, you can create competition, you can create tech refresh and incentives for disruption. There are going to be a lot of places you just can't do that. There are a lot of places that you can. And I would submit that's what programs of record of the future for this class of technology needs to look like. Or we're not creating the right incentives to get the best out of American industry.
Yeah. So on this, to kind of make this a little bit more concrete, some of the best of America innovation, especially within defense, is happening on the ground in Ukraine with partnerships like you. We had Brandon Singh earlier from Shield AI, and I know you guys are frenemies of types, but they're working together in many important ways toward a shared bringing capability to the folks on Ukraine, and that is the living lab for a lot of these different types of technologies. It is where you can actually do testing and evaluation against, the Russian First Guard tank army. And you guys have been there from the very beginning. And now you're kind of trying to take those lessons and apply them to that Indo-PACOM challenge through mass, like you were describing, deterring China by having enough bots on the ground. What are your main lessons that you guys have taken away from that experience in Ukraine that you continue to participate in? And how do you apply those to deterring China from starting World War III? Yeah,
it's a great question. And I mean, we Anduril, have been supporting the Ukrainian military since literally the first day of the war. It's a longer story that I won't belabor. I wish we had, as a country, as a Western alliance, used Ukraine as an opportunity to do more new things, right? To use it, I mean, this will sound terrible, but as a battle laboratory to help them get what they need, and in the process, really prove out new technologies that will be applicable for the United States and our allies and partners. I don't think we've actually done that to the degree that many would like us to believe and that we really should have, but that's sort of a separate matter. I think there's lessons from Ukraine that transfer to Indo-PACOM. I think there are lessons that don't. And I think it's important to sort of parse this. The things that I believe do transfer, the types of technologies that we're now seeing on the battlefield in Ukraine create sort of a new table stakes for basically everything that we're going to have to build, right? The expectation that it has to be capable of functioning in a comms or electromagnetic spectrum, disrupted, degraded, denied environment.
Yeah.
The need for mass, right? The need for mass producibility, the expectation that you're going to shoot a lot of things, you're going to lose a lot of things, and you're going to have to replenish them like immediately in days and weeks and months, not years and decades.
Yeah.
So just a whole order of magnitude, a scale that is going to need to be created. The need to adapt in flight, right? The thing that works today doesn't work tomorrow. The thing that works this month doesn't work next month.
Yeah.
We have a learning adversary and a highly capable adversary in Russia and even more so in China.
Yeah.
So we cannot have this expectation that we're going to go to war on day one. God forbid we have to do it. And everything that we're going to be using is going to be the exact same things in the exact same configuration, in month 2 and year 2. And I think that's the final thing that I would say is really kind of a challenge to the assumptions that we need to really grasp. For a generation, we've been planning as a nation that we are going to fight short wars.
Yeah.
We have been sort of shaping and sizing and developing our military under the assumption that the war is going to be over in a matter of hours or days.
Yeah.
So we're not going to have to shoot a lot of things. We're not going to lose a lot of things. We're not going to have to replace and replenish a lot of things. I think if you look at the war in Ukraine, if you look at the war in the Middle East, Gaza and sort of more broadly, if you look at most wars that the United States has been involved in over the course of our history, they do not follow that logic.
Right.
So I think we've been in this aberrational period of history where we thought we could get away with a very small military that was going to fight short wars, have technological overmatch, and everything was going to be amazing. And I think that is not the future that we are moving into. That's not the present that we are in right now.
Yeah.
So those are the lessons that need to transition into Indo-Pacific.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge then becomes, the geography of that region is wildly different than the geography of the battlefield in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Where you have a lot more water than land. You have enormously long distances. You have a far more capable adversary with a far more robust anti-access area denial, kind of complex.
Yeah.
So the need to start building programs where, whether it's weapons programs or unmanned vehicle programs, they're going to have a lot more size, weight, and power. They're going to have to transition kind of traverse much longer distances. They're going to have to sort of remain on the battlefield for a lot longer.
Yeah.
These are going to be bigger systems, right, in every way. And I think that's where, I see a lot of folks go awry, which is like, we've got, these amazing first-person view drones, and we'll just kind of lift and shift from Ukraine to the Indo-Pacific. And most of those things are not going to make it a quarter of the way across the Taiwan Strait.
Yeah.
So again, there's probably a lot of things that literally are, kind of lift and shift. I would submit the things that really matter are these larger lessons that I was talking about earlier. And then the real challenge for the government is going to be designing programs that have the attributes of what has succeeded in the war in Ukraine, but is actually purpose-built for the challenges of the Indo-Pacific region. Yeah. And the China challenge in particular.
And you think that this is, so right now, one of the things that's become this really important battlefield technology in Ukraine is drones that fly and they're invulnerable to electronic warfare because there's actually a fiber optic cable that connects the operator to the thing. It's a very long fiber optic cable, but that's not really a solution that's going to work in Indo-PACOM. Yeah. And you can also train things in. And if you're talking about an archipelago of islands, you don't necessarily have that capability there. So 3D printing, advanced manufacturing sort of at the edge, digital twinning. Yeah. How can you create that massive factory scale, the ability to all of a sudden put out enough systems at a close enough time frame within that context to have that deterrent effect, to keep that adversary in the corner? Is that I know that's something you guys are thinking about. What's the conversation like that now at your company and with folks you talk to at DoD? Yeah,
so we're doing a lot more than thinking about it, right? I mean, we're actively doing it, and we are putting to work literally billions of dollars to build the capacity to do this. I mean, this is exactly what the Arsenal One production facility in Ohio will be doing. Mm-hmm. I think all the technology you mentioned and 15 other ones are really good and useful, and they have a role to play in all of this. Mm-hmm. I think the far more significant point that I would focus the conversation on is sort of upstream of all of that. I think as we've taken the sort of scaling manufacturing journey over the past several years, as we are winning more programs that required scaled production, and we are going into production on multiple things at once, I think what we believe is the way that you will get to systems that are producible and replaceable actually starts with how you are designing those systems at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Unless they are designed and unless the requirements reflect a simplicity of design that makes them mass producible, that makes them replenishable, there's no amount of money, there's no amount of magic or technological wizardry downstream of that is going to make something that was designed and required to be basically unproducible and irreplaceable the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? One of the programs that we were selected on and are performing on now is the Air Force's Enterprise Test Vehicle program. It's effectively a low-cost cruise missile, 500 miles, designed to be $150,000 a copy, right? So lessons of Ukraine applied to a system that is relevant to the Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah.
Across every design choice of that weapon, we are trying to eliminate defense-unique supply chains that don't scale, critical materials that don't scale, highly specialized workforce that is going to take years to train and develop and also doesn't scale. And wherever possible, replace those with commercial supply chains, less exquisite materials, commercial materials, a workforce that is capable of being sourced out of commercial automotive or commercial aerospace and defense, or frankly, some retraining from guys who are working at Home Depot, because the production and assembly of these systems looks a lot more like assembling IKEA furniture than producing a 5th or a 6th generation fighter aircraft.
That's crazy.
It's the same thing that we're doing with the collaborative combat aircraft. It's the same thing that we're doing with the Ghost Shark XL AUV in Australia.
Yeah.
It is a design philosophy for mass production.
Yeah.
And unless we solve this problem at the outset, and this is where industry needs government help, right? It needs the government to think differently about the requirements so that it is factoring in and valuing things that it now says it values that traditionally it has never valued. Yeah. Producibility, replaceability, adaptability, sustainability, all of these things that, the other ilities that traditionally we have not valued as a country. That is not what we have bought. That is not what the government has required. Yeah. And as a result, we have gotten exactly what we have incentivized and exactly what we are purchasing, which is a military that cannot scale, that is going to be out of critical munitions in the first week of a war with China, and an industrial base, traditional industrial base, that is capable of growing what we have, let alone the order of magnitude increase in capacity that leaders in the government are now calling for. Yeah. We have to do that at the beginning, which is why I continue to believe we need new programs. Yeah. This isn't about inserting some technological magic into a weapon system that was literally put into flight when I was in high school, which is most of what we have. Yeah. And hoping that somehow we're going to magic our way out of that problem is just not possible. Okay, we got time for some questions. Raise your hand if you have one or two. Right here in the front. But first I want to ask you on this. Fun fact, I love this Home Depot cruise missile story, because it's like guys in Ukraine are right now creating intellectual property around weapon systems that they use, and they're designing it in the field, that's the person who designs. Fun fact of trivia, did you know that C-3PO was actually made by Anakin Skywalker? Isn't that weird? You ever see the prequels? He's the guy that made C-3PO. So Kid in the Dirt can be the person that makes, the cruise missile of the future. So right here, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. So my actual question is, as you said about new warfare where the cheap, fast drones are working, and I just want to let everybody know that United Kingdom adopted a new military doctrine where it's 20-40-40, 20% for the heavy weapons, 40% for reconnaissance drones, and 40% for the lethal drones. That's how America is a little bit behind, but my question is not about that. My question about this, that Ukraine, not only as a lab, as you said, for how the new weapons or new, cheap and fast being used, but it's also a lab of how people being trained. And that's an enormous asset. And I just want to have a question, how do we get current administration to recognize that not only we learn how drones can be used, but how to train people in the numbers that has been trained in the past, 2.5 years when the drones really took off?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I would go back to the point that I made about designing weapons and military systems at the outset that are purposely done with the intention of creating the largest potential workforce to build those systems and assemble those systems, right? So when I look at what's happening in Ukraine, you have a modern day equivalent of Rosie the Riveter, who's in there soldering drones and low-cost cruise missiles and other things. These are not master welders who've had 12 years of experience and training.
Yeah.
And I would submit they're able to do that, one, because they're phenomenal people and they're working hard and all of the other things, but it's because the requirements for the system they're building were not gold-plated at the outset, right? They were actually built specifically so that you could create scale. And as a function of scale, you need lots of people who are going to be capable of contributing. So unless that system is designed in such a way that you can tap into that sort of broadest possible workforce, you're never going to generate those kinds of scale. So for example, like when I look back in American history, during World War II, we flipped the Willow Run car production line into a production line for the the B-24 long-range bomber. We could do that because the bomber, that bomber, was not wildly different from a technology standpoint from the cars that line was producing beforehand. It is inconceivable to me that we could turn a Ford Motor Company production line into a production facility in a year to build B-21s.
Yeah.
B-21's amazing. I want more of them. It is not possible to leverage those types of commercial supply chains, the broad workforce, all those other things, because the system was not designed to do it. So what I would submit is the way we solve the problem that you're pointing out, and I think what I'm trying to say here, is we need to go back to actually how America generated mass throughout our history, which is not making things overly complicated, simplifying them, designing them so that large numbers of people can contribute to the production and assembly. That is eminently doable, but it requires choices throughout the process, starting with the requirements of the system all the way through the design that is actually valuing the elements and the workforces and the other components that generate scale and replaceability and all of the things that we now say we also care for and we're going to need. Because when I look into my crystal ball, God forbid we have to fight a war with China, it's not going to be over in 4 days. So we may be ready for week 1 of the war. My question is, how do we get ready for month 2 and day 300? Because I don't think that war is going to be over in the first week.
Yeah. Another questions. Here we go. I see a hand? Yes, right here in the center.
So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit how Anduril has used the Small Business Innovation Research Grant Program to grow the business, and how as a $30 billion valued company you're able to continue using that? Because there's a lot of people in this room, I think, who are jealous of what you've been able to do.
Well, I think we should first start. The SBIR program is a remarkable program that has been woefully underutilized and to some extent misutilized by the government, right? So I don't need to repeat the history of a lot of this, right? Where a lot of the companies that are winning these contracts are coming out of cyber mills. They're not companies that are trying to leverage the amazing authorities of that program to go through a competition, to prove out the technology, and then to get to scale. When we were, a smaller company and we still, SBIR was still applicable to us, our focus was, I think, the original intent of the law, which is how do we use these authorities with our government partner to rapidly prove out core technologies and then get them into a position where they can go to scale. And I think what frustrated me throughout the process was it was very easy to get, a cyber phase 1 contract, right? The government more or less hands them out like candy. Slightly harder to get from phase 1 to phase 2. But then the real question becomes, once you get to phase 3, by definition, in accordance with the law, the government is able to sole source that technology or that capability area to that company because of the competitive process and the risk reduction process that the company has gone through with a government partner to be in that position. My frustration was that all too often, we would then deal with, a different part of the government or, a program executive office or someone who would say I'm not familiar with this law. I'm going to have to run my whole new acquisition competition. I'm not just going to transition this technology, which is literally what the law requires. So I think a lot of this is educating people about how remarkable this program actually can be, getting the government to police it up so that it's actually being used more in line with the intent that it was created for. And then, frankly, putting more pressure through congressional oversight and senior leader engagement in the department to actually make use of what the law allows, which is a phenomenal pathway to do the very thing that so many people are sitting around struggling, saying like, oh my gosh, like how do we rapidly prototype and then get into production like new disruptive technology? And here's this program that has literally been custom built to do that very thing that is woefully underutilized in that respect.
Yeah. But you can't even find it. Like it's hard to find it's hard to find how to get control of such a contract or use it if you're a brand new company that already is having a bunch of headaches dealing with the government, trying to sell to the government.
Yeah, but I think this is like one of the countless ways that Congress has passed and executive branch has passed have sought to make the pathway to working with or even beginning to engage with the Department of Defense a bit easier, right? And then you layer on top of that, the hundreds of pages of acquisition authority and acquisition reform that I was a part of in my time on the Hill, and the creation of DIU, and the proliferation of innovation organizations, right? It's never been easier to get going on a small contract to build a small thing for the Department of Defense. That's the good news, right? The challenge is that it still has never been harder to take that new thing across the valley of death into real production. And I think that's where these types of laws, these types of authorities, we don't need to reinvent them. They're there, right? We need people who are informed and incentivized to actually use them to do the very thing that increasingly everyone says that they want to go do. So, as much as I'm a supporter of a lot of the acquisition reform that's going on the Hill right now, I would submit that the department and Congress have all the authorities they need to get going on these new types of programs like I'm describing. It's just a question of using the authorities that exist, and SBIR is a great example of one of them.
I have so many more things I want to talk to you about, like how you're using autonomy and what that means for designing these next generation flying machines and how smart they can be, and more about the future of your relationship with Palantir and SpaceX and what might come of that or might not. But we are out of time, which sucks.
I had amazing answers to all of those questions that you'll just have to imagine what they might have been.
Yes, well, I'll just ask ChatGPT later and we'll see if it's...
It'll probably do better answering than me.
Please join me in thanking Chris Brose for joining us today.